Well, welcome. I am Manuel Ergon. I am the Community Engagement Manager for Lighthouse Writers Workshop. Thank you for joining us tonight for this virtual happy hour reading. During COVID, and as we were isolated, we launched our virtual happy hour series, and we took a little bit of a break over the past couple of months, but we are very excited to be joined by Randon, Angie, Susanna, and Christopher, who are all writers and who have works in the anthology, A Harp in the Stars. And so I'm going to introduce Randon Billings Noble, who's an essayist. Her collection, Be With Me Always, and anthology, A Harp in the Stars, were published by the University of Nebraska Press. She's the founding editor of the online literary magazine After the Art and teaches in West Virginia's Wesleyan's Low-Res MFA program and Goucher's MFA and Nonfiction Program. Randon, thank you so much, and I will pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Manuel. And thank you to Lighthouse Writers for hosting us. It is truly a pleasure to be here tonight to introduce the anthology that I edited called A Harp in the Stars. It's an anthology of lyric essays. And in just a few minutes, we'll hear from three of the contributors to this anthology. So I wanted to talk from and read from the introduction for just a little bit to talk a bit about what a lyric essay is and what it can do. So lyric essays try something daring. They rely more on intuition than exposition. They often use image more than narration. They question more than answer. But despite all this looseness, the lyric essay still has the responsibility of any essay to try to figure something out, to play with ideas, to show a shift in thinking, however subtle. The whole of a lyric essay adds up to more than the sum of its parts. Lyric essays require a kind of passion, a commitment to weirdness in the face of convention, a willingness to risk confusion, a comfort with outsider status. When I'm writing a lyric essay, I'm not worried about what it is or what to call it. But when I started teaching lyric essays, I needed to put words to the form, to try to define it, to make it at least a little more accessible and understandable, even as I kept running into contradictions in my own thinking. Sometimes I enjoyed the lyric essay's elusiveness. Other times I felt like I was following a set of backward hoofprints. But the lyric essay's wily capaciousness is among its strengths. I came to define a lyric essay as a piece of writing with a visible, standout, or unusual structure that explores, forecasts, or gestures to an idea in an unexpected way. But about that visible, standout, unusual structure, those gestured to ideas, lyric essays are tricky. If you try to mount one to a spreading board, it's likely to dodge the pin and fly away. If you try to press one between two slides, it might find a way to ooze down your sleeve. And if you try to set it within a taxonomy, it will pose the same problem as the platypus, a mammal, but one that lays eggs, semi-aquatic, living in both water and on land, and venomous, a trait that belongs mostly to reptiles and insects. It will run away if on land, its gait that of a furry alligator, or swim off in the undulating way of beavers. Either way, it can threaten you with a poison spur before it ripples off. In this anthology, as well as in this reading, you'll find a wide range of thinking about the lyric essay, how it can leap, search, wander, hint at, unravel, excavate, and create, how it can both replicate and explain trauma, how it comes from or leaves behind fiction and poetry, how it acts like a panther, an iceberg, an on-ramp, an artichoke, how it's defined and how it can never be defined, how it tries and how it delivers, how it sings and how it plays. Orpheus's lyre accompanied him through all sorts of adventures. It traveled with him as deep as the underworld, and after his death was sent by Zeus to live among the stars. You can see its constellation, Lyra, in the summer months if you live in the northern hemisphere, the winter months if you live in the southern. This feels like an apt metaphor for the lyric essay. The stars are there, but the shape is what your mind brings to them. So that's just a little bit from the introduction from the book. And we can talk more about what a lyric essay is, how it fits in the essayistic tradition, or how it's a part of the creative nonfiction, sort of nestled under the creative nonfiction umbrella. But I think it would be best to hear some first. So I'd like to start by introducing our first reader, Susan Donato. Her work has appeared in Redivider, Electric Literature, Proximity, Entropy, and elsewhere. A graduate of the Lighthouse Writers Book Project, she's attended Tin House Summer Writers Workshop and been a resident at Vermont Studio Center. She lives in Denver, and she'll be reading an essay from the anthology, A Segmented and Hermit Crab Essay. Thank you, Susanna.
Thanks, Randon. Yeah, I'm so excited to be a part of this anthology, which I have so much enjoyed reading and just savoring. So thank you. And I'm so excited to hear my fellow writers read their work. This is my essay, which is called Classified, and it is a segmented and hermit crab essay taking from a dictionary definition of that word. So it begins. A small advertisement grouped with others like it. My friend X and I tired of each other's company midway through a college summer, and ennui of classification. Would we remain friends? That eventually placed us in a cafe beneath a downtown viaduct, nursing a plastic carafe of cappuccino. We waited for a stranger with whom we'd had one phone conversation. His voice was softly sibilant, his confidence assumed and effete. My pulse skittered in my throat. We'd listed our personal ad under friendship, but one could hope for more. How will I know you? He'd asked. With a hand muffling the mouthpiece, we conferred and decided on the bowling pin that now wobbled on the varnished table, a gleaming odalisque with pale cracked skin, salvaged from a shuttered Brunswick lanes. He appeared amid the smoke, black garments swirling like ashes around a fireplace poker. Though he'd mentioned the cure in his response to our personal ad, I hadn't anticipated his degree of commitment. He had bad teeth and an overbite. I considered whisking the bowling pin back into my bag, but his narrow right hand, weighed down with silver anchorings, had already pulled out a chair. Then something fragile in his eyes softened me. B, arranged or assigned according to type, as in a caste system. X dubbed my new companion, for he became mine and not hers, Weird Brian. The name distinguished him from the normal Brians we knew, with his stringy black hair and the Dead Can Dance badge on his bag. We met him this summer. X and I both planned to drop out, but then didn't. For me, that first year, financial aid came through. The next year, I dropped out anyway when I realized I was middle class, Western, and crazy in a way that divided me irredeemably from my peers. Thus, I classify myself as a dropout at two different points in time, both true and both imprecise. When you're part of a group and then no longer part of it, the absence feels urgent, like waking from a dream of falling. You flail arms. I'd been a gothy teenager, then an Ivy League punk. Now I was a 19-year-old with an office job. I flailed when I looked at my receptionist costumes, not black, in my closet. Who had I been? Who was I now? I took comfort in how others avoided eye contact or made way when Weird Brian and I walked down the street together. Each quirk I tolerated, his florid handwriting, his cigarette holder, restored me to what I considered my original self. At one time, I'd rehearsed in the bathroom mirror so I could appear unimpressed when someone flourished their scars, puckered pink burns on translucent forearms, pills rattling in a purse, a ragged homemade piercing in a flared sunset of infection. I pretended I no longer believed that external scars equaled internal depth. After all, I'd left school when I realized that no careful shell could erase my internal mortification. I'd originally chosen goth culture because it gave me a classification, a place to be. Black clothes and black eyeliner, creepers and onks permitted people to assess me and dismiss me at a glance and empowered me to hate them for it. In this respect, Weird Brian reinstated a home I had lost. C, sorted by the constituents of a substance as ore. He was several years older, maybe that was it, all of 25 perhaps. He blurred our edges, masculine and feminine, into a kind of liberation. I can imagine how his body must have looked, white, wiry, a scar or two, but my memory can't arrange the components of his face. I can't remember if he was as tall as I was. His affectations abashed me. Twice while I knew him, he changed his name from his mother's Anglo-Saxon commonplace to add the Greek for life, a flash of white in the darkness. First, it was complicated. Then he changed it to Zoe, easier to pronounce. P. Revere's dad changed the family name for the same reason, from Revoir, he wrote me, on account of the bumpkins. He made me feel loud, pushy, normal. He liked drugs as entryway to the subconscious. I considered them cheating. He had a GED. I'd quit Barnard. He read Kant on the bus to Boulder. I read Faulkner at cafes on my lunch break. Did psychedelics disarrange a brain or make you egalitarian? I can't remember what caused him to ask, do you think you're an intellectual snob? Accusation or clarification of similarity? I took a moment to consider his question. If you have to think about it, the answer is yes. I said no. D, withheld from general knowledge for reasons of security. Neither of us had a car. We stayed in touch via postal mail. He inked elaborately infrastructured triangle-based cartoons. I returned philosophy and poems. For him, I exaggerated my surreal side, wanting to impress, to keep him close, or maybe curious if I could frighten him away. We collaborated on a comic. I was words, he was images. We pretended we thought others would care about our pockmarked fairy tale world. We pretended not to know they might not care. We pretended not to care about their indifference. From my other friends, I cloaked our relationship the way he cloaked his body. Oh, we're working on art that day, I'd say, or, oh, I've got to get back to Weird Brian about our book. E, organized by degree. Once he came to my place in the afternoon. Buses were safer during the day. Also, I wanted to avoid any connotations that might arise between us if he were in my apartment after dark. Seeing him again, I was struck by how he matched his artwork, not tall, built like a paperclip, all black lines and condescending wit. Against his slightness, I was self-conscious of my height, my swells, the breadth of my shoulders. We never went to his house. He lived with his mom. One night we met at the coffee house to write. A pinched nerve made me squirm with pain, but Weird Brian had suffered back problems himself. Affecting clinical cool, he tucked a lank lock behind his ear. For me, the remedy, his eyes swam behind granny glasses, was sex. I gaped at him. I'd be willing to help if you wanted to give it a try, he said. I smiled thinly. How badly I wanted to be wanted. At 20, I'd never been propositioned. I'd been pawed and pressured by boys I didn't want and not kissed by those I did. Was my desire to be desired measurable in ounces, degrees, leagues? I slept naked in an empty bed as if pretending to be desirable would attract desire, and here he was. The failing winter sun backlit his silhouette. Luminous red rimmed his Fu Manchu mustache as he pawed through his medieval magician's carryall, pretending he would find what he needed in its depths. What decrees attraction? Who is permitted to desire? How gently his eyes skirted mine. His obliqueness moved me. I scanned my body to detect any response to his offer, but there was none. My decorum mimicked his own. Thank you, but I think I'll pass for now. Certainly. His fingers scrabbled inside his bag. Certainly, just keep it in mind. I told him I would, and it's true. I never forgot he had offered. F, assigned to a category. Weird Brian began renting a room from a sturdy blonde hippie. Upstairs, parrots in the kitchen, caged quail in the yard, 2 chickens, Lucy and Ethel, on the back patio. In the basement, Weird Brian in a room. Not really a room, the closet beneath the stairs. At that moment, in England, J.K. Rowling was writing Harry Potter. He pinned an invitation in spidery script. She's permitted me to invite you to dinner. I'd be honored if you would attend. He had no money. He didn't work. We ate on a blanket on the living room floor. I've forgotten the menu except the delicate quail eggs he'd obtained at some cost from the roommate. I'd inveigled a friend into coming, not only because I had no car to reach the suburbs. Weird Brian wished I'd come alone, I could tell. He turned his body at a not impolite angle, his slightly stooped, black-clad back to my friend. He was trying to show me something, show me his home, that he could have one, that he could be human. Was this love? I scanned my emotional taxonomy. I couldn't classify him. Friend, more than friend, less, all and none. I couldn't bear to picture him without his black garments. I used him like a priest for my absolution. I required that he curtain his desires. He wrote, I keep seeing a woman who looks like you at Ground Zero, a dance club in Boulder. I can't think of what to say, only stare. She probably thinks I'm a pervert. Maybe I am by now. I guess it's been a while. His pleading, categorical loneliness. I wanted him, but did not desire him. He was a control group between past and present. I was learning to decide what I wanted. How? G, characterized by variation or contrast. If he had collected me, we could have dressed like Renaissance festival refugees and listened to Sisters of Mercy 24 hours a day. Our skin and teeth would turn gray. In his closet, the walls painted black, we could have whiled away evenings with his pet rat, whose fur glowed luminescent under the black light. If I had told him we called him Weird Brian, he would have taken some delight in the word's archaic implications, the fates, the otherworldly, the eerie, traits to which he aspired. I liked knowing the weird, I realized, but I no longer wanted to become it. After that, we lost touch. 4 years later, when I ran into Weird Brian at a bookstore, his hair was scragglier and a silver septum ring grazed his mustache. A woman in green velvet with black dyed hair brushed imaginary crumbs from his sleeve. She was making excuses to touch him, I saw. What pang is as bittersweet as the happiness of someone who offered themselves to us, even if we declined, especially then. The woman smirked as if I'd lost something. My boyfriend, soon-to-be fiance, was upstairs somewhere. A few promotions into a PR career, I was taking up the yoke of standard adulthood. I hesitated to reveal anything that would let Weird Brian define me. That day, I might have been wearing Docs, but during the week, I wore Ann Taylor. I didn't want him to know that I was sliding into the bourgeoisie, indistinguishable from any other 20-something yuppie. Biological classification sorts organisms according to observed similarities. Brian and I had seen only our likenesses until our taxonomy stretched too thin to sustain us. How strange that I'd found him in the first place by advertising for him. I'd bought public space to call out my loneliness. I can't find anyone like me, I'd cried, and he answered. But meeting again, it was almost as if we'd never had anything in common at all. That day, I felt only relief as we parted. But sometimes still, I see a stark, witty India ink drawing in a gallery, and I hope it's his. It never is. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Susanna. It's such a pleasure to hear these read out loud in your own voices, and to hear all the different ways that classification works in that essay. Thank you so much. Christopher Linforth. Our next reader is Christopher Linferth, who is the author of 3 story collections: The Distortion, which is the winner of the 2020 Orison Books Fiction Prize, and Directory, and When You Find Us, We Will Be Gone. Christopher will be reading a flash essay from the anthology. Thank you, Christopher.
Okay, thank you, Randon. This piece is called The Punch. My run takes me from Hemingway's grave down to a bagel cafe and around the back of Ketchum's YMCA. The thin air in the Idaho Valley slows my jog, renders the 6-mile route a painful affair. On the path, the other side of the bridge, I come to a broad expanse of sandstone slabs, the jagged outcrop extending all the way down to the Big Wood River. Garter snakes sit coiled on the flat rocks in the late afternoon sun. The white-haired man looms over the gray snakes, whipping his winter-gloved hands at ghostly hisses. His fists jolt out erratically, combinations of off-kilter straights and wild uppercuts. By chance, he catches one snake flush on the side of its head. The serpent jerks against the rock, then disappears into a shadowed crevice. As I dodge past the man, unable to process his motivation, I recall a time with my father back in England. At 8 years old, I owned a pair of boxing gloves and felt the mystic power of the raw crimson synthetic leather. On that afternoon, I punched the exterior of my house, enjoying the thuds reverberating off the brick. When I raised my arms in the air, a meaty fist cracked my soft cheek. My father towered over my furled child body. I thought you were a fighter, he said. He egged me to stand, to come at him, try my luck. I stayed down, watched my father sneer, light a cigarette, and swagger back into the house. Now, all these years later, I see this white-haired man, a wiry shard, a vessel of thin bone and warm muscle. I shout at him to stop. He continues to flail, his arms pinwheeling. I get up close and tap him on the shoulder. Enough, I say. The man swipes at a snake stuck on a chest-height ledge. I edge in front of him, feeling my fists bunch. His grey eyes avert mine. He spits in my face while cursing something incomprehensible. Then he backs off. I watch his retreat for a moment to make sure he is done. I wipe the spit from my face and start my run again. I loop back to the cemetery. I kneel once more in front of Hemingway's grave, and I clear from the flat expanse of granite a few empty beer bottles and foreign coins, a love letter to Papa. I press my knuckles against the cold stone and think of how hard I would have to punch to break a man. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, I wish we were in person so we could have that sort of moment to absorb that applause, that sort of inhale, that like sound. I'm here alone in my room and making that to so many wonderful lines in these readings. Thank you. After our last reader, who I'll introduce in just a moment, we'll take any questions that you have from the audience, so you can put those in the chat, and we'll be happy to talk with you more about any of these pieces, these individual pieces, as well as the lyric essay in general, the writing life, etc. So I just want to remind you that you can put some questions in the chat. But before that, we have our next and final reader, Angie Chuang, who is an author and journalism professor based in Denver, Colorado. Her debut memoir, The 4 Words for Home, won an Independent Publishers Book Award Bronze Medal. A former newspaper journalist, she's on the faculty of the University of Colorado Boulder and lives in Aria Cohousing Community with her husband. Angie will be reading a braided essay tonight. Thank you, Angie.
Thank you so much, Randon, and for everything you've done since conceptualizing this amazing idea, and to Susanna and Christopher for your amazing essays. I'm so glad to hear them read by both of you. So I've learned that since writing this essay, that a braided essay is uniquely difficult to excerpt for a reading because of its nature. And so what I've done is I'm going to read you the first paragraph, and then I'm going to skip to the final about 1,000 words of the essay, which are the last 2 strands of the braid kind of concluding. So I think it would probably help to know that the 3rd strand that you're not fully going to get to hear about is about Diane Fossey, who is responsible for establishing the Volcanoes National Park Gorilla Preserve in Rwanda. You might know her story from Sigourney Weaver's portrayal in Gorillas in the Mist, and that her favorite gorilla that she kind of was a steward for was named Digit. Some thought that Fossey preferred the company of gorillas to humans, and that she had chances in her life to find love and have a family, but she chose to live a solitary life to protect and be with the gorillas. Okay, so this is the excerpted version of Scar, Silence, and Diane Fossey. My scar is about 4.5 inches wide across my very lower abdomen. It was carved into my flesh the summer of 2006 by the scalpel of a skilled surgeon who had calculated it was the least invasive but safest way to remove a large ovarian tumor that had turned out to be borderline cancerous. I was 33 at the time. I had been single and obsessively career focused when I had the surgery. Suddenly, I had to consider concepts that felt foreign to me: fertility and the importance of having children, the meaning of family and partnership. Okay, and here's where I fast forward to the last part of the essay. On the day for which Laura, Patrick, and I had pre-purchased passes for hundreds of US dollars to enter the preserve with guides in northern Rwanda, About 100 others were with us. We were mostly North Americans and Europeans, waiting at dawn in the monsoon rain to be split into smaller groups to hike into the mountains and contact various guerrilla groups. We hiked for several wet, muddy hours. I strained against the high altitude. This was before I lived in Denver. I was a Washington, D.C. resident at the time, and slippery footing, but was grateful my backpack's waist strap did not chafe at my scar and that my body felt strong, not fragile, as it had before in the years following the surgery. Given Fossey's anxiety about the scourges of tourism, I had expected more evidence that this land had tamed into commercial submission. Perhaps some cleared trails, signs, or bridges over the creeks that became raging rivers as the rain came down in unrelenting sheets. As Benson, the Rwandan guide nearest me, cleared brush with a machete and occasionally turned around to offer me a hand when I struggled with the steeper and muddier stretches, I saw this was not the case. At first, I had hesitated to accept Benson's help. I was embarrassed that I, in $200 Gore-Tex boots, was far less sure-footed than the guide in his rubber galoshes. Then we forded a thigh-high creek turned cascading river, and I grasped the hands of the guides, who waded in and formed a human chain in lieu of a bridge for dear life, grateful in a way that felt novel, like a relief. Benson was the last link of the chain, machete tucked into his belt, as he helped each of our group of 10 up the last, most precarious step onto the opposite riverbank. I gripped his hand firmly enough to feel the roughness of his palm, the surprising strength of his wiry arms, and the unwavering stability of those galosh soles on submerged rocks that felt like polished glass. I guessed at his age, late 30s, possibly 40s, and imagined the experiences, the generational trauma he might have spoken of if, shy of intermittent small talk, this silent exchange were not the only conversation we were having. When I stepped safely on the opposite riverbank and let go of Benson's hand, I felt regret and guilt, more real than I had in the week prior in Rwanda. I had traveled across the country with Laura and Patrick for that time. I had been moved by the beauty of the country, the brutal history of the genocide, and the friendliness of the people I met, even as they skirted around references to the past. I had shed tears at the unflinchingly brutal exhibits of the genocide memorial and felt rage as I learned how the insidious project of Belgian colonization paved the way to civil war and genocide. But in truth, I had trouble grasping the enormity of these events on a visceral level. They still felt unreal, even as I looked at the machete notches slashed into human bones and skulls. I felt ashamed that my attempts at imagining, as sickening as they were, had failed. After a few more hours of hiking, Laura, Patrick, and I found ourselves staring rapt at a huge silverback gorilla strutting, leaning on his cantaloupe-sized fists before a tableau of smaller females, one of them suckling a baby. The white hairs on the male's coat that signaled his age and dominance were sprinkled like moonlight across his lower back. The clan looked back at us with limpid eyes, their lush fur impossibly black, their leathery faces so human, yet not. Our guides moved us to a younger silverback, a peripheral male, like Digit, alone in his own clearing, sitting on his haunches and stripping a branch for food. Compared to the hubbub of activity in the family group, the grunts and vocalizations that seemed like background noise once we got used to them, the lone silverback space was still and quiet, save for the sound of tearing bark and his soft breathing. I thought Fossey's sadness for Digit, of her envisioning the family he might have had if things had played out differently for him. I imagine, maudlinness be damned, that Fossey had seen the loss of her own parallel life, with Bob Campbell, with children, when she looked at Digit alone. I made eye contact with the peripheral male. He stared back in a way that the others had not, at once guileless and searching. I felt kinship and loneliness so unexpected in that moment that, for the first time in the hours that had preceded it, I forgot how soaked and weary my feet and body were. My face had been cold and wet for so long, it was not until I tasted salt and felt warmth that I understood my tears were mixing with the rain. Contrary to my pre-surgery fears, about a marred body, I came to see in time that the scar itself wasn't the problem. I had learned to live with it, even appreciate that my surgeon had taken care to make the incision appear organic to my body. The incision arced like a landscape painter's shorthand for a seagull in flight. Below the swell of flesh on my lower abdomen, the one that countless exercises had never budged. Once I found my way to the dating pool after surgery and recovery, the scar became a Rorschach test in intimate situations. I always preempted its revelation with a brief explanation. Borderline cancer, surgery, still have the other ovary, technically still fertile, in case you were wondering. One man said, "Sorry you had to go through that," and then avoided looking at it, asking about, or touching it. His silent and averted eyes became a metaphor for the rest of our short-lived relationship. Another asked, "Did it hurt?" To which I wanted to answer, "Of course it fucking hurt," but mumbled a quiet, "Yeah," instead. A married man I became involved with said before he could censor himself, "My wife has the same scar." This statement took root as a reminder of his daughter's birth by C-section and that I was party to betraying his wife and their child. As these encounters played out, I missed the physical pain that created my scar, the searing sensation of split flesh held together only by sutures and Steri-strips, dulled but not erased by narcotics. As that clarifying focus had become diffuse a couple months over surgery, other more complicated, ambiguous aches took its place. In the end, what disturbed me most was my inability to articulate what I'd want them to say when they first saw my scar. I couldn't shake the cynicism when I went on a second date a couple weeks after returning from Rwanda. It felt trivial to be dating even after the trip. I had first met this man, the one with arresting blue eyes and an easy smile, in a coffee shop days before I left for my trip. As we had exchanged information before parting that day, I mentioned I was leaving the country for a month. In spite of my doubts that I would ever see him again, we had stayed in contact. Near the start of our second date, sitting on his housemate's overstuffed leather sofa, beers sweating in our hands, I decided to bring up my surgery and my scar. Why wait for the moment of intimate revelation, as I had with other men? So I have this scar on my lower abdomen, I concluded, and a missing ovary. I told him about my surgery and diagnosis, and then braced myself for the usual reactions and questions. "Me too," he said, surprising me. "Well, not the ovary, obviously, but I have a scar and I'm missing a kidney." He had been born with a Wilms tumor, a type of kidney cancer that usually develops in very young children. The scars from multiple surgeries grew with him, he said, and they crossed the entire lower half of his torso. He was lean with an athlete's body I could see under his t-shirt, though it was not tight. He instinctively reached for the hem of his shirt as he described the scars. Then he paused, rethought, and said quietly, "Maybe you'll see them later." His later was the most lovely and sensual single word I had heard in a long time. Later, we were each surprised by how negligible our scars seemed in physical reality. His were worn into his ribcage and abdomen as if he were a weathered oak that incorporated a lightning strike from 4 decades ago. When he first saw mine, he said, "That looks like part of your body," and paused. "Well, it is." He wasn't afraid to touch it like any other part of my body. As we spooned, I would find his hand resting in the slight groove it made on my torso, the way one's thumb might naturally find the indentation in a hand-thrown Japanese teacup. Even then, I knew better than to believe that finding a similarly wounded partner would answer all the questions surviving an ovarian tumor had stirred. Cancer teaches the inhabitant of a treacherous body to distrust concepts like clean margins and remission. The skepticism carries over to the blurry boundaries of our lives and intimacies. Rwanda, Fossey, and Digit had shown me that not every conversation or revelation occurred in the direct confessional ways American culture favored. Sometimes proxies and metaphors made offerings to the negative space of silence. Sometimes they were all we could bear for the time being. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Angie. I can't tell you, all of you, how magical it is to hear these essays read in your own voices, having read them so many times on the page. Thank you so much.
And thank you. I just want to agree with Randon. This was amazing to hear your work, and thank you for sharing for us tonight. Folks, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. I'll start with our first question, and this one's for Randon, and then I have a second part that I'll ask of the authors. So Randon, as the editor, where did this idea come from to put together this collection?
It came partly through my own curiosity and partly through my teaching. I have loved the idea of the lyric essay, but I found it difficult to get a consensus about what these actually are and how to define them. So they're definitely essays. They're nonfiction pieces that try to figure something out. It could be overtly, it could be subtly, but there's some kind of thinking work that happens in an essay. And I was trying to explain lyric essays to my students, and I wanted to give them a collection of them. I wanted to give them a book of lyric essays of all different kinds, all different subjects, all different forms that they could read. And while there are some really wonderful anthologies out there that come close, I hadn't found an anthology dedicated entirely to the lyric essay. And I thought, why don't I make one? And that felt kind of audacious, but I asked my editor at Nebraska about it. And she said, this is a terrific idea. Why don't you ask some people if they'd like to contribute and then write a proposal? I'm sure we'll say yes, which they did. Put out a call, and you can put this thing together. So I had picked a few essays and a few essayists that I knew I wanted to be in there, but I knew there were so many lyric essays that I hadn't read, essayists that I didn't know yet. So I put out a call, got an overwhelmingly wonderful response, and was very lucky to be able to choose from an amazing array of essays, these really, really, really terrific ones.
Thank you for sharing that. And then for our authors, what prompted you to submit the piece that you shared, or that was ultimately chosen for the collection? And anyone can feel free to jump in.
I'll go ahead and start. This piece is actually, my piece is one that it's kind of part of a book-length memoir that I was working on, although it then has kind of taken its own shape as I've kind of pulled out strands of that book-length piece and worked them into essays with the idea of submitting them. And this one, I had workshopped several times in Lighthouse workshops, actually, and then had kind of fiddled around. I had some friends who were doing kind of hermit crab formats, and I really just that kind of spoke to me as a way to organize this essay that I was struggling with. What I guess it's always, what is this anecdote about? And so I found this idea of classified because it was a classified ad that brought me to this friend in my life. And then I was thinking about all the different meanings of classified and seeing how they fit. And it just gave me a new way to look at that relationship, actually. And then that kind of produced the revelation, or whatever, that's a big word, but the conclusion at the end of the essay, and that way of seeing it, the story. So I guess, submitting it, I was sending it out, but I had read Randon's collection of essays and just kind of felt like, oh, this is kind of what, I just felt like it might be a fit. So I wanted to send it in.
Well, I was connected to Randon through social media because we had both been at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts residency at the same time. So I knew she had been envisioning and working on her own book of lyric essays and then this collection. And I wrote in my reflection at the back of the book that I've never seen myself as a lyric essayist, and really didn't think I would find a place in this anthology. And I sort of challenged myself to submit and say, well, if it's accepted, then maybe I am a lyric essayist, but I probably won't. So I'll just send it. And it was actually 2 pieces that had been rejected for years at so many places I don't even want to list them. And then I braided them together on a whim, and then spent a lot of time with a lot of really generous critiquers, some of who are on the Zoom. And then it just reached like just the right time of having gotten enough feedback or revision at the time that I sent it to Randon. Really thrilled when I heard back from her.
I'm just trying to recall kind of like how long ago it was, maybe 2 years ago or longer. At the time I had been writing several, just because most of the time I write fiction, and but I had written over the semester a few short flash pieces of nonfiction, and I just kept working on them. And then somehow I must have seen on Twitter or somewhere something about a call, and I went to Randon's website, I believe, and at first I was a bit confused because I thought it said Random Billings, and I thought it might have been some type of scam or something. And then anyway, but I investigated further, and I was like, oh, I sent something in. And so I was very pleased and happy when it got picked up, because I hadn't workshopped the piece or anything. I just written it, just gone over it a few times, and I was happy with it. And yeah, so just seems like so long ago now that it was accepted. But yeah, so thank you.
I have to pop in and say I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm so glad that it wasn't a scam, but I can see how my name would lead to that. And I'm so glad that you all did. In talking with some other contributors, we were joking a little bit that it seems almost like someone else has to tell you that you've written a lyric essay. Not always, but in a lot of cases, we joked that it was almost like being knighted, like you couldn't do it yourself, but someone else had to say, ah, yes, look, this is a lyric essay. And then hopefully it's a pleasant surprise and you can go from there.
My next question for all of you, and thank you all for sharing that. I'm just always, I'm always curious how, especially anthologies, come together, because it can be such a, it seems like such a very neat, straightforward process, and often it's not. So my next question with all of you, I think you all mentioned this at some point in the last question, that all of you have other things that you're working on. And so maybe you can tell us about, I know sometimes writers like to talk about their projects, sometimes writers don't like to talk about their projects, but you can maybe share with us what you're currently working on. And yeah, we can go from there.
I can start it. The braided essay that I read from was originally a chapter in a larger hybrid memoir with literary journalism that I've been writing and revising for years. I won't say how long, it's way too long, about how we make choices in life and the narratives and cultures and experiences that shape them. And so I've interviewed other people about that and have stories of my own. I eventually pulled this essay out of the book, so it now is independent. But the stories about the ovarian tumor and the decision making are very central to the book, among many others. So I finished a first draft, and we'll see what happens to it.
Okay, I guess I can go next. Well, earlier this year, I've been just going through edits for a book of short stories, The Distortions, which is out in March. So I kind of had to spend so much of the year working on that. And then I'm supposed to be working on a novel, always supposed to be, and which is kind of a sister book, which takes place, both books take place in the former Yugoslavia. I was living there back in the early 2000s for a while, and all these years later, somehow all processed out as fiction in various ways. So there's very little actual of my time there, but it's just kind of been inspired in some ways of my living there and the culture and the people I knew and still know and things like that. And so I'm supposed to be working on that novel. It's been put on hiatus for a while. So recently I've just been writing more short things, more flash fiction, and these ones all seem to be about the internet and internet culture in one way or another. So started those, written 6 or 7 of those, and see where they go. But yeah.
Well, I have to confess that I'm one of those writers that was kind of woefully unproductive with creative writing, since the pandemic started. So there's been a lot of stops and starts, but yeah, the book length memoir that I mentioned has sort of morphed over many years. We can have a length of project challenge offline, Angie. But it's something that I kind of had written and then have finding the conclusion of things is always a challenge for me, and getting to an end or wrapping things up. So that manuscript, I've kind of ripped it all apart and been rebuilding it from some of the bricks and some new bricks and things like that. And then some of my time in the last couple of years, I spent writing a chapbook that I've sent out a lot of places, and it really needs a home. But it's a little book called Lavatoria Dreams of Shame, which is has been a fun project. It's these like prose poem pieces that a lot of them talk about. I call them sort of a dreamoir pieces, but they're based on dreams, and I was having a lot of dreams about bathrooms, and most of it's not like too gross, but it was just like, why am I having these dreams? And my husband, I think, got tired of hearing me tell him about the dreams. He was like, why don't you write these down? But no, he had faith in me to morph them into something artful, which I hope I've done. So that's kind of in the submission process, and I still would love to find a home for that.
I look forward to reading all of these projects whenever they manifest in the wider world. But I'm also firmly in the supposed to be, or was supposed to, club. But the pandemic was really catastrophic for my life, creative writing process, all of that stuff. So instead of supposed to, I'm slowly coming back to working on a book-length lyric meditation on shadows, which is a very different way of writing than an essay collection. So I've sort of happily trapped myself in a challenge of writing sort of the ultimate braided book-length work with many little fragments interweaving in and out. So I have 20 pages worth of interesting stuff, and I'm trying to figure out where to go from here, thinking about shadows in art, in literature, in the physical world, in metaphor, etc. So it's under contract with Nebraska. The pub date is no longer relevant, but it will happen eventually, and I'm looking forward to getting back into that. Meanwhile, I get to talk about lyric essays and be parts of these readings. So I think that's my current project, is exactly this.
Thank you all for sharing. Let's see, the one question from the chat, Vicky had asked, what do these 3 essays have in common? And so I'll throw it to Randon, and then we can, even the writers, you can share just hearing each other's work.
Yes, my first answer is flip, but also really sincere, and that is I loved them. As the editor of this anthology, having all of these essays come across my desk, the 50 that I wound up choosing, some of them are flash. It seems like an enormous amount for one book, but a lot of them are flash essays. But these are 50 essays that I just loved. But also, I thought they were all really interesting examples of each form. What can you do? How many things can you weave together in a flash essay that's 1,000 words or fewer? How many different kinds of strands, not really how many, but how much contrast can there be in strands in a braided essay where it still adds up to reveal something interesting and powerful? How can you use a dictionary definition format to tell a story and reveal things about longing and loss and identity and classification? So truly, there's no theme to this book, Harp in the Stars. That's not all essays about a particular subject, but they're all united by being different examples of lyric essays. However, sometimes when someone asks a question like this, there's something at work that I completely haven't seen. And so if someone else has an answer, things that you see in common in these 3 essays, I would love to hear it.
Well, one thing I noticed was there's a lot of stuff related to bodies and physicality and being in the world, and the world kind of affecting the body, shaping the body. So I thought that definitely was coming through in the 3.
I think that each of our pieces would be served less by being in conventional form. Like I couldn't really imagine either of your pieces, Susanna or Christopher, in a like straight chronological form, or Christopher's as a longer piece and a flash piece and having the same emotional impact on me.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think you know, to me, the lyric, one thing about lyric essay is just the connection to lyrics is just the emphasis on the word choice and the particular kind of sound of the language. But I just think of it as sort of, and I feel like all of these pieces do embody this of holding something, and essaying is always trying to understand something, but I feel like these 3 pieces all definitely share that kind of, it's like holding up I don't know, a jewel. This would be a big jewel, but a crown jewel. But like, really examining it, looking at it really from different directions, but being sort of meditative at the same time. And I could really feel that in all these pieces, even though they're such different shapes of jewels, I guess, different cuts.
I love all of those answers.
Thank you all for sharing that. Our final question for the evening comes from the chat, and it's addressed to Randon, but I'll ask all of you this. What are some of your favorite literary magazines that publish lyric essays?
That's a good question, and my mind just went completely blank. So I will also lean on fellow contributors. The Seneca Review likes lyric essays a great deal. Diagram is interested in experimental work. Any journal that's publishing creative nonfiction, you might not think of them at first, but they have some amazing lyric pieces. That one about the weather that was formatted so interestingly on the page. Brevity takes short flash essays and some amazing lyric essays. One by Diane Fossey that's in the anthology was also published by Brevity. And really any journal that would take a creative nonfiction piece, I think would be open to the lyric essay, even if they don't know it yet. I think even places that you might think of as publishing more traditional essays would read something like this and be pretty excited to have it. So those are a few off the top of my just went blank, but trying to recover head.
Yeah, I would say looking, of course, looking at the, where things have previously been published list in the book. I know Redivider had some great work in and took a very lyric essay of mine, and I had a good experience at Proximity too. There's another one that does kind of short pieces, is Thread Count, does some really nice work. Those are a few off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, as Randon was saying, just most literary journals seem to publish creative nonfiction and short pieces, and often they say like lyric essay as well. And so, yeah, so I mean, I would just look at, the guidelines, but pretty sure I used to work on a journal years ago in Virginia, the Minnesota Review, which is at Virginia Tech, and has a long and strange story. That journal started in Minnesota and went to Oregon and Stone Coast and Carnegie Mellon, and Virginia Tech bought it as a post-Marxist academic journal, and then stole half of it to publish creative work and half of it to give to the French department or something. But anyway, that's run by the MFA. Half of the journal is run by the MFA program. And when I worked there, they did accept lyric essays, especially, and even though the journal's been around a long time, not a lot of people have heard of it or think it's associated with Virginia Tech, but it is there, and give it a shot. It's free to submit to, I believe.
That's an amazing list. And I would just add, I think Fourth Genre and River Teeth are two journals that are very focused on innovative nonfiction. I just had I would say it's lyric, a lyric-ish piece published by the most recent Asian American Literary Review. And there's a piece, I'm trying to look it up right now. Vahini Vara, who is a Colorado writer, just wrote a piece about the death of her sister, in which she used AI to finish her sentences. And I cannot remember the journal that published it. I think it was The Believer, but I'm not, before they went, they shuttered. It might have been one of their last essays, but that to me is lyric in a completely different and mind-blowing way.
Thank you all. And yeah, it was The Believer. So thanks for sharing all those answers. So Randon, Susanna, Angie, Christopher, thank you all for being here with us tonight and reading your work, sharing your thoughts. Where can folks find this collection, Randon?
A great question. You can find it, I feel like the commercial, everywhere books are sold. You can order it directly from the press if you want to. That's nice to support the University of Nebraska Press. I also advise people to go to bookshop.org so that you can order it through a local bookshop near you. It's also available at Amazon, Walmart, Target. I was surprised to find that, but you can order it through stores like that as well. So I would encourage you to go to the press or go to bookshop.org. Oh, thank you for the link in the chat to order it from whatever bookstore that's near you that you would like to support. And you can also ask your local library, either a public library or an academic institution, to buy it so that you can read it and then others can read it later too.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you, as I was saying, we kind of took a break from virtual happy hours, and this weekend we have two. We have one tonight. Tomorrow is a hybrid event to celebrate the release of Lighthouse instructor Jenny Shank's new collection, Mixed Company. So you can, if you're in Denver, you can join us in person. If you're not in Denver, you can join us on Zoom. I'll put that link in the chat as well. Again, thank you all for reading and sharing with us tonight. We really appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.